Hey, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, cheat codes to get the most out of this, your belt grinder. So I own 5 or 6 belt grinders depending on how you do the math, from this little Harbor Freight 1x30 to this tricked out Ameribraid right here. Now, I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that you can do tons more stuff, more easily, faster, more accurately, all of that with this grinder than with this. But that does not mean you can't squeeze more performance out of this than you might think. So today, 10 cheat codes to get more out of your grinder. Now, obviously, some of them are going to apply mostly to fancier belt grinders, but some of them will apply even to that little Harbor Freight that I showed you. And even if you have a super simple grinder, stick around because at the end, I got a couple special tips for you. Hey, and if you've got a cool belt grinder secret to share with the world, make sure to leave it in the comments below. All right, number 10, steal that radius. Now, this right here is a radius, and this right here is a radius. Basically, they're just little chunks of circles. You'll find circular surfaces everywhere in knives. You got interior curves on knives, just like this one. You got thumb ramps. Well, there's not one on here, but choils, Spanish notches, finger notches. I mean, circular radius surfaces are everywhere in knives. The more that you can use your belt grinder to perfectly and efficiently grind circles, the better. Now, the way you do that is by enlisting every wheel on your machine to give the radii that you need. You know, modern belt grinders like this Ameribraid have just ungodly numbers of attachments. Small wheel grinder attachments, large contact wheels, all kinds of things that are intended to specifically give you a nice curved radius. But many grinders don't. You know, when I got started, I generally made radii by pecking away at the corner of my flat platen right here and then cleaning up the radius with a half round file. I mean, it still works, and if you're patient, you can make it work very well. But in the grand scheme of things, not that great a way to do it.
Now look, this grinder has everything but the kitchen sink, small wheel attachments, big contact wheels, various platens with various sizes of wheels. Pretty easy to see where to get radii from, but not every grinder has that. So start looking for other wheels you can use. This, or this, or this. Pop off the idiot guard, and even this $60 grinder has a hidden grinding surface you can harvest a radius from. Makes a great finger notch.
Real quick here, guys, if you've been enjoying all the free content I've been offering on YouTube for the past 15 years and you want to get back to the channel, there's a way. It's called Patreon. All my Patreon supporters at any pledge level get plans to most of my builds, plus other bonuses for higher pledge levels, plus you get the good feeling of helping out the channel. So help us, help you. Link in the cards and description. Thanks, and now back to work. 9, get the full value out of your grinding table or work rest. That's this right here. My first grinder was a Bader that I have sitting right over there just out of frame. It's a fantastic machine, but the tool rest, kind of a joke. So more on that later, but the point is that most machines today have a lot of adjustability with the tables. Even this cheap little Harbor Freight has a table that articulates. And my Ameribraid, you know, there are just a million ways to work this table right here. You can go up, you can go down, you can go in and out. You can flip it around and use it like a woodworker's edge sander. You can cant it at an angle. So I would highly recommend when you first get your grinder, take time to figure out all the ways that you can adjust that table. Eventually, you're going to use them all. 8, this right here, variable speed. Now, when I got started, I bought a single speed machine. And that made me pretty good at grinding with a really fast moving belt. But most grinders today have a variable speed available, and it doesn't cost a crazy amount of money to upgrade from the single speed model, assuming that they make one that way. So if you possibly can, go variable speed.
Now, of course, variable speed makes it a little easier to grind something accurately by backing off on the speed. Depending on your personality and your skill level, there may be a temptation to crank away to the max, or conversely, to just creep along super slow all the time out of fear of screwing up or overheating things or whatever. But the secret here is that every belt, every process, and every material has an optimal speed. If you're going too fast for that particular thing you're trying to do in that particular belt, then you're creating problems. You're burning micarta, you're blowing your temper, you're overheating fittings and burning the epoxy out of your handle pins. If you go too slow, you're wasting time and sometimes even causing excess wear or glazing on your belts. Some belts are engineered specifically to run hard. Grinding micarta or wood, back off on that speed. Grinding the profile of your knife with ceramic belts, crank that baby up to the max. Finishing up bevels with a structured abrasive like 3M Trizac belts, better get down on the slower end.
7. Use jigs and fixtures. Now, most people are aware of what a grinding jig is. They can be as fancy as this one that has all these holes and special stuff drilled in them and all this, or they can be as simple as something like this that I just milled out of a bar of steel. I've even got a video about how you can make a fully adjustable one for, like $5. Anyway, the point of a jig is to repeatedly grind things time after time after time. It could be for grinding the face of handle scales at a particular angle. It could be obviously like this for grinding bevels at a particular angle, whatever. But there are tons of ways to get repeatable effects from a grinder. Anytime you repeat something a whole bunch of times, you might benefit from either making or buying some sort of specific fixture for doing that particular thing.
Fixtures can be complicated, but they can be as simple as this. Maybe you need to grind the same angle into a bunch of handle scales to make a multi-part handle. Use super glue or double-sided tape to stick a block of wood on your work rest, and then start grinding. Another thing that's great is to use V-blocks, 123 blocks, and other machinist setup tools like this milling vise to orient handle scales and other material so that you can grind a repeatable angle. You can even tape a ruler to the table. Works great.
Six, get slack. Now there are times when you want a nice, crisp, hard grind, and your flat platen is great for that. But here's the secret assassin in the knife maker's arsenal. It's the slack belt. Sometimes when you want to, make smooth transitions for things, especially this is true when making knife handles, that's when a slack belt fixture is really just hard to beat. Now, wait a minute, you may say, well, sure, obviously I can buy a slack belt platen with my fancy expensive grinder, but I can't afford one. Or maybe you don't have a fancy grinder with swappable arms. Or, and this is true for me, maybe you just don't want to go through the rigmarole of constantly swapping out flat platen, slack belt, flat, slack, back and forth. So, here's the trick. On most grinders, there are little sections between the platen and the idler wheel, or above the platen, or even in a section like this. So there you go, you actually had a slack belt and you didn't even know it. Now, by the way, if you're gonna do this right here, make sure that you get off to the side, like so that that knife is not flying off and hitting you in the face. Pro tip, nothing plays nice with a slack belt set up like a flexible J-weight belt. See how flexible that is? Molds to all those curves. 5, cheat with a drill. I use my battery-powered drill constantly. You can chuck up pins and rods, put a chamfer on them, all kinds of cool things you can do with them.
Got a pin that's a hair too tight to go into a hole in your handle? Throw it in the drill. Take off 2 or 3 thou using a slack belt or a little slack section like we talked about earlier. You can grind that material off nice and concentrically so you don't get ugly gaps. Need to put a point on a tool like a punch? You can even sharpen a pencil. Yeah, I know. Still.
4, magnetic holders. Now obviously grinding steel creates a huge amount of heat and nothing beats a magnetic holder, especially for grinding things flat against your flat platen. I actually produced this particular model. It's a variation on a design from Andy Roy of Fiddleback Forge. You can buy them from Pops or you can make one yourself. Not only are there a lot of different ways to hold things with magnets, but there are a ton of things that you can do with them besides just flattening things. You can taper tangs, you can clean up after heat treatment, you can remove factory scale, just thinning down stock sometimes. Lots and lots of stuff that works a lot better if you just get a magnet. 3, experiment with different belts. You know, it seems like every knife maker I know has this secret belt that they just love using. What I mean is there's a particular belt that he gets some kind of cool effect out of that I haven't seen anybody do before. It's not the belt itself. I might have seen that particular kind of belt 1,000 times, but it's what he does with it. Some particular combination of the effect of that belt and how he's using it. If you look over here on this rack, I probably have at least 15 different kinds of belts. And I'm not just talking about grit sizes, I mean the actual types of belts there.
There are belts that are great for soft materials but terrible for steel. Belts that are great for making soft curves and handles. Belts that are great for hogging off a lot of steel. Belts that, well, you get the point. Now, I've said this in at least 8 billion videos before, so I'm not sure I can really call it a cheat code, but every time you stock up on belts, I recommend buying one belt that you've never tried before. When you get that belt, experiment with it. Don't worry about tearing it up or anything, just see if you can find a use for it. The more belts you try, the more cool things you'll be able to do. There are actually a lot of techniques in knife making that are extremely belt specific, so until you find that perfect belt, it's hard to do it.
2, use your attachments. On the smoke them if you got them principle, doesn't do any good to buy a bunch of cool attachments and then never use them. If you buy a modern belt grinder, you'd be well advised to buy as many attachments as you can possibly afford. You may find that some of them don't work all that much for you. You know, personally, for instance, I almost never use my rotary platen. Some people love them though. So you may find some things that work for you and some that don't, but some of them will be awesome and they'll really solve a particular problem that sometimes you can't solve any other way. So what kind of attachments are out there? You know, you got flat platens, you got a combo platen like this, radius platens, small wheel attachments, large contact wheels, surface grinding attachments, waterfall grinders. I mean, just tons and tons of different types of things. My final cheat code, mod that grinder. So, okay, I told you at the beginning, you know, you guys have very simple grinders, inexpensive grinders, that I'd circle back with something that would be particularly helpful for you. So my point here is that there are a lot of things that you can do to modify a grinder to get just a little bit more use out of them. You know, a lot of small grinders have terrible tables, as I alluded to up top, and you can often modify them. You know, you can add some additional material like an aluminum plate or something. You can extend the sides of the table. I've seen people make them so that you can articulate on different axes or do more articulation with them. There's just, you know, there are all kinds of things that you can do. I've known guys who fab new platens, you know, out of a beefier piece of something, angle iron or something like that, to replace these little chintzy platens. Point being, if you're unsatisfied with what your grinder's doing, maybe what you want to do is make some kind of small modification that'll let you get lots more out of it.
On more capable grinders, there's tons of stuff you can do. I mentioned up top that the work rest that came with my baiter was inadequate, so I added this entire shoe here to my flat platen and then made a work table to slide into it. That's kind of elaborate, but the mods can be as simple as grinding a small radius on the corner of your flat platen. It doesn't have to be earth-shaking to be useful. Make your own attachment arms. Large contact wheels can be pretty steep when you buy them from the factory, so I bought this wheel on eBay, then fabbed my own arm. Pretty easy to do, works great, and it was like half the price of a factory wheel.
So, hope these cheat codes will help you step up your knife making game. Remember, just because a belt grinder doesn't have an obvious solution to a knife making problem that you're running into, doesn't mean that it's not there. As the great baseball player Dizzy Dean said, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. All right, guys, thanks for watching and keep on making those knives.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.